Looking at long run costs now. So still we have to refer to the short run and the long run. So in the short run, it was the period of time where at least one factor of production is in fixed quantity. And what this means is that your scale of production remains fixed. There's a maximum output that you can achieve. And the short run, if you remember the other presentation, this is where diminishing marginal returns can set in. And it's because one of those factors of production is in fixed quantity, whereas the long run is the period of time where all of these factors of production can be varied. So therefore, there is no maximum output that you can achieve. You can produce whatever output that you want to achieve. Okay, these are diagrams from the short run. We've got the cost curves on the bottom here with average variable cost I've got on this one, and usually you have your average cost as well, which is a little bit higher than the average variable cost, depending on how big the fixed costs are, of course. And we've got marginal cost intersecting it, and along the horizontal axes we've got the output, and up the vertical one we've got cost. Whereas when we're showing marginal product and average product, they're just the mirror images of each other, but we have along the bottom the variable factor of production, which in this case is labour. This is an American picture, as you can see with the spelling of labour. I've just googled this picture to show you what I'm talking about here. And up the vertical axis is average product or marginal product, basically the output that you're showing here. So average output, marginal output, but you can see the axes are not the same axes, although what the diagrams show is both showing what happens to costs and productivity and output in the short run because of that fixed factor of production, and it's what we can use to show diminishing marginal returns. But just trying to draw your attention to the axes here, they're actually different labels. Okay, this is going to become relevant later on and you'll understand why I'm emphasizing this point. So we're going to be looking at economies of scale, and these are things that you should have learned about, or concepts that you should have learned about in the AS or the first year of the course. So I'm not going to go through them in too much detail, but just recapping the key definitions. So internal economies of scale are where average costs fall as output increases, and this is in the long run. Remember, we're talking about the long run now, and here are some of the reasons why. I won't go through these in detail because you can look at the AS presentation on this to go through them. External economies of scale are when average costs fall as the output of the whole industry increases. So internal economies of scale happen to the firm itself, and it's as the firm's scale increases, whereas external economies of scale are the benefits of the market or the industry increasing in size. And here are a few examples. Whereas diseconomies of scale are where average costs start to rise as output increases. So at first, with economies of scale, we've got this bigger is better, we've got all the benefits from being big, and then later on we go on to the disadvantages of being big. So we've got some examples there, and external diseconomies of scale, similar in the sense to external economies of scale, that it's all about the industry increasing in size, but here we have average costs rising, and here are some examples, or here's one example, but you can have a look at those, as I've said before, on the AS presentation. So here's our diagram, and we can see economies of scale at first and then diseconomies of scale after a certain point. Now I think some of my students get the idea that at this point A, this is where all of the economies of scale stop occurring, and this is where all of the diseconomies of scale start occurring. Well, that's not actually true, and if you look at purchasing economies of scale, which are the discounts that you get from purchasing large quantities, you're probably going to get those discounts. Whatever size you get up to, you're still going to be getting discounts. Maybe, not as beneficial, they might stop after the 100th or a millionth unit or whatever it is, but the likelihood is you're still going to get benefits and perks from ordering in big quantities. So economies of scale, certain types of economies of scale, will still be occurring past this point A, and diseconomies of scale can actually start occurring before this point A, but the point is that on the balance the benefits from being larger are outweighing the disadvantages of being larger until you get to a point, and then the benefits of being larger are smaller than the disadvantages of being larger past this point A. So it doesn't mean that technical diseconomies of scale can't actually start occurring from this point, you know, or you're still, you know, probably gaining from financial economies of scale even past this point here. It's just that on the balance, the diseconomies of scale are going to be outweighing those benefits from the economies of scale. And if we want to marry up the short run with the long run, we have this diagram here. So you've got your short run average cost curves, and we can see they're tangential at certain points. They're not tangential necessarily where it's productively efficient. They don't bend round, but they are tangential at these points here. So theoretically, we can get this, I think this was a past paper question, we can get a situation, if I look at this cost curve here, where you've gone, this would be roughly in the short run the point of productive efficiency. Say you're producing beyond that point. So really what that means is this firm could do with being a little bit larger, operating on a larger scale, because actually they're well into diminishing marginal returns at this point. But they're still benefiting, they're still on the side of the long run average cost curve, so they're still benefiting from economies of scale as well as incurring diminishing marginal returns at that point. So you can get them occurring at the same time. Okay. So some more key terms, and these are probably not ones that you looked at in the AS course, but they're actually very related. So increasing returns to scale is when the percentage increase in inputs is smaller than the percentage increase in outputs. So if you're increasing labour, say by 10%, what you're finding is that your output is increasing by more than 10%, so that sounds good. Constant returns to scale is where the proportional increase in inputs is the same as a proportional increase in outputs, and then decreasing returns to scale is when you get a increase in inputs that is proportionally larger than the increase that you're getting in outputs. And what we see is it's not kind of all or nothing. What happens is that if I look at this diagram here, is that over time you get a thing where it might be constant returns to scale, and then you get decreasing returns to scale. And what you're looking at here, and thinking back to those first diagrams that I show you, this is the scale that you're operating at. So your kind of maximum output, or you know, the mixture factors of production here, along here, so going from 0 upwards, and here you're showing your marginal product, just like right at the beginning when we were looking at the cost curves, but also at the average product curves and marginal product curve. On the bottom we had units of labour, and then up the side we had marginal product as well, and average product or output you could have put at the side. So what I'm saying here is that actually returns still are a concept that's very linked to economies of scale. Usually A level you're looking at average cost curve or long run average cost curve really, and along the bottom is your output, and up here is your costs. But you can also show this concept using returns to scale, and increasing returns to scale and decreasing returns to scale by moving your output to this axis, and rather than putting costs along your horizontal axis, you're putting your scale of production along the horizontal axis. And you see that it's just, this is just an image of the average cost curve. So very much like in the short run, that the cost curve is related to the average product and the marginal product. In this case, these two are related to each other. So it doesn't usually mention this too much in kind of past papers or anything like that, but just in case you came across it, because I'll just skip ahead here to the specification objectives, and if you look at it, it actually says the law of diminishing returns and returns to scale, so returns to scale in the long run. So I think a lot of students don't notice that it's actually in the specification. They say, you know, what are returns to scale, and they're not exactly the same as economies of scale, because what economies of scale and diseconomies of scale are looking at the cost advantages that you gain from increasing your output, and the cost, I suppose, after a certain point when diseconomies of scale set in, you get the increasing average cost. But returns to scale are looking at, as you're increasing your inputs, are you getting, so increasing returns to scale would be that you're getting a larger proportional increase in output. Constant returns to scale is where it goes flat, and you're getting the same proportional increase in output as you're increasing your input by. And then decreasing returns to scale is when you're getting, you're having to increase your inputs by a greater percentage than the percentage that the output's increasing by. So don't ignore this when you read about it in the textbook, because it's the same concept, really, just shown in a different way. So some more key terms: minimum efficient scale, and this is the lowest level of output that your long where, sorry, I've just typed clear, the lowest level of output where long run average costs are at their lowest. Now that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but it's this, we can see it here on this diagram. It's where you get to this lowest point. And so if you were looking at return to scale, this is constant returns to scale here, isn't it? And so what is the smallest level that you could produce at where you're gaining as much as you can from economies of scale? That's basically saying. And we'll look at that in later presentations, because that has an implication for the size, for the amount of firms that you can have in the industry, and it can act as a barrier to entry. So if you have, I'll just draw another diagram here, if you have something that's an average cost curve, a long run average cost curve for one industry, and then you have something that looks like this, we can see that the MES sets in a lot sooner than the MES, it's sort of setting in there, isn't it, for this industry. And so it means that this have, just using O for output, I should really be using Q. This industry here, Q1, could actually support more firms who are operating at an efficient level than this industry here, if they both, you know, have the same level of demand, that is. So it can act as a barrier to entry, because it suggests that you have to be a certain size before you can be productively efficient. And so if you know, you're entering the market and you're just a small little firm, and you're coming up against a big firm and there's a really high MES, that means that their costs of production are going to be significantly lower than yours.